What's up everyone, welcome back to the channel. Once again, another still worth it video, and this time we're talking about a phone that's actually pretty old. It's just as old as like the iPhone 5S, it's not old in terms of like the age, because there's definitely phones that are way older that are still pretty decent, but this was a very interesting phone, and the concept of this phone is still super relevant even though it is kind of an older phone. So that specific phone is the iPhone 5C, and if you were to ask me like a couple years ago or whatever, like, oh, is the iPhone 5, like if you were to ask me in 2017, is any of the remnants of the 5C going to stick around? Are there going to be anything crazy? And I would say no. Like, I think I even did a review in 2017 about this phone, and I was like, yeah, I don't like this phone at all, but this phone is actually more important than some people might think, and that I thought initially. So looking on the front, I mean, first of all, this thing was released in 2013, the same time the iPhone 5S was announced, and this was pretty much the iPhone 5 but just in a cheaper form factor, and they were selling it for a cheaper price. And if you kind of think about that logic, okay, they're taking an older design phone or just taking even a new phone, whatever, they're making it cheaper than the newest model and they're selling it for a cheaper price. That same concept was pretty much transitioned over to the iPhone XR and the iPhone 11, and we're probably going to be getting that for the future models as well. And it's one thing for the concept to be the same, like the pricing strategy, but if you think about it, the coloring scheme and everything was exactly the same too. So the 5C actually had a bigger impact than we might have actually thought initially, which was pretty cool. On the front of the iPhone 5C, we have a 4-inch display, a 640 by 1136 with 326 pixels per inch. This was an IPS Retina display, so that's awesome, but it's the same exact display pretty much that we had on the iPhone 5, as well as the 5S and the SE and all those other 4-inch form factor phones. So it wasn't a horrible panel at the time, and it's not a bad panel now. I mean, you have to think about, when it was released at the time and how it is now. I mean, this was a whole 7 years later almost, so of course it's not really a good panel now. And that screen size, a lot of people don't really, want it that small anymore with all that bezel around it, so it's totally understandable, but it is what it is. I don't think anybody's buying an iPhone 5C anytime soon for the most part. It has a single front-facing camera up top and a home button on the bottom. On the very bottom of the phone, we have the lightning port and the headphone jack on this phone as well, which is cool. On the back, a single camera setup in that ceramic plasticky type of build that the iPhone 5C was known for, and there were several different models of this thing of color-wise. There was like a blue, a green, a yellow, a red, and a white one. I think I have the white one or the blue one, I don't remember. I think I've owned like all the colors at some point. I think I like got rid of them or something, but the colors were a super cool concept. And even though it was really weird update and upgrade coming from the 5, I still think, it had some value in it, so I don't want to go off on it too much that I've already done. In terms of software, this thing started off with iOS 7. We are able to upgrade it to iOS 10, which is cool. So this thing started off the same time as the 5S, like I stated. And iOS 10 was pretty decent at the time. It's still pretty much held up. What's funny is that this phone did eventually get iOS 10.3.6, which was just the latest update that got released, I think like 6 months ago or something, which is pretty crazy. But iOS 10 was pretty decent for the time being. I think iOS 9 was pretty good too, but definitely iOS 10. And in terms of that, it's really held up in terms of software. Of course, it's really outdated and you're pretty much behind on a bunch of security updates and things like that. You got that major one not too long ago, but pretty much every other which way you're outdated for the most part. But what I will say is that there's still a jailbreak out for this thing, I'm pretty sure, so you can always go and jailbreak this and add more features. But a downside of this phone, let alone the software features and just the security of you being on an older version of OS, the app updates in these stores sometimes aren't compatible with phones that are this old, so you might actually have to go and be on a certain firmware in order to download specific apps. And I think some iOS 11 apps are going to start, being discontinued as well, or you're going to have to downgrade to a older app in order to get the app installed on your phone, because these app manufacturers, the iOS architecture isn't the same as iOS 13, and in a few months the iOS 14 architecture, so you kind of have to keep that in mind while you're kind of buying this phone. But ultimately what I can tell you is, in terms of software, completely outdated, like 100%, but it's not a bad version of the software to stop at. iOS 10 was pretty good, like I stated, so that pretty much covers that. Let's go and hit on the performance. So this thing, when it was released, had the Apple A6 chip, a dual-core CPU, and there were a couple different models of the iPhone 5C. and they all had 1 GB of RAM. And what I can tell you about the specific performances is that, it's probably what you expect. It's not the fastest thing in the world. It's pretty slow, and it's really slow in the parts where it means most. When you're loading apps, when you're doing things, like that's where it's slow at. But when you're navigating around the UI, when you're going through settings and clicking on things, and small little type tasks like that don't really require a bunch of memory and a bunch of power in order to do. So it kind of gives the illusion that it is a lot faster than it is in the beginning with, especially when you go on like slide to unlock, or when you go press the home button to unlock it. It gives like such a smooth experience from the gate, but really it's such a slow performing phone, which is expected. The 5 was a slow performing phone, and again, I don't want to bash on it too much. I've already done it. I don't want to sit here and say it's the worst phone ever, because it really isn't. At the time, 2013, there were apps that were in games that were made, that were made for that specific time. Nowadays, we have much higher graphically intensive games and much higher graphically intensive apps than that time, so kind of keep that in mind. That's one huge thing to keep in mind. Another big thing, like I stated earlier, is the software support in terms of just the app updates. A lot of those apps are not necessarily getting updates for the most part, and some apps have had issue even getting it installed on my phone in the first place. And I always have to, for the most part, I think Snapchat is one, maybe even Instagram, have to revert to an older version of that specific app. And I know with Snapchat, after a certain amount of time, you're not going to be able to log in into your account from that specific iOS version until you're on a certain version of the app firmware. But that app firmware will not update unless you're on a certain iOS version that supports it. So it's kind of like a catch-22. In terms of performance, the smaller apps, like I stated, Snapchat and Instagram, pretty slow at the end of the day. But once you go into those bigger apps, like, Temple Run 2 even, that's not even that big. But if you go into Real Racing 3, those apps definitely show you a bit of, skip frames and things like that. So it's not a horrible performing phone at the end of the day, but it is one thing that you kind of have to keep in mind when you're kind of navigating through this thing. So like I said, not a horrible performing phone, but one thing you will 100% have to keep in mind when you're going and using this phone. So that pretty much covers it up in terms of performance. Now hitting on the camera, this thing has a single 8 megapixel camera on the back and a 1.2 megapixel camera on the front. Now talking about that back camera, it has a 1080p sensor. You can do 30 frames per second on it. You cannot shoot 4K. You cannot do 4K at 60 frames or anything like that. Too crazy. This was a 2013 phone. You can't even do 1080p at 30 frames. So you're pretty much limited on a lot of the features. You don't have portrait mode, no night mode, no nothing like that. So in terms of the camera, the quality is okay. It's an 8 megapixel sensor. It's actually not that bad for being a phone that was released back in 2013. Of course, the 5S was much better. You were able to do 720p at 60 frames and different things like that, which is really cool. But this phone does not support those things. And that's kind of sad because, this phone, the camera quality should have been a little bit better at that time. Eventually, with the 6S, we got a pretty big update. But what I can say in terms of this camera, even if it was great quality, which it really isn't, but if it was, and let's say the video quality was amazing, you would still be limited on the camera features in terms of the hardware. It doesn't have a telephoto lens, no ultra wide, no nothing like that. So like I said, you're already kind of limited in terms of what you can do into the future. But in terms of now, we're living in the now, it's okay. I don't think anybody's really going to care for the most part unless you're trying to take professional photos everywhere. But other than that, I think it gets a job done. So I wouldn't really freak out about it too much. So that pretty much covers it up in terms of the camera. Now ending it off with the battery life, this thing has a 1507 milliamp hour battery. It is actually not that bad of a size battery for this phone. It's not a ginormous phone. It's pretty small. Also, the screen is really small too, so that kind of has a favor going for it. The stock battery life, if it was full of 100%, it'd probably be better, but you guys already heard the story. All batteries degrade over time, so it's not at that full 1500. It's probably at like 1000 or probably less than that. So in terms of this battery, it's okay. It'll probably get you through a day. But the most important thing to note, and probably the best way I can end off this video, is that even though this phone really has no use of in 2019 or 2020, now that we're in, I totally forgot what year it was. And even though, we have a bunch of these phones coming out that are way faster, way better looking, all this stuff, the main thing that I like about the 5C is the repairability. And I feel like a lot of other phones fall into this category as well. The iPhone 6, the Galaxy S5, even all those, all these older phones. With the 5C, if you crack the screen, if you break the camera, if the battery starts breaking or something, I don't know, you're still able to fix it for a very cheap price. You can easily go get an iPhone 5C screen on Amazon or anywhere like that and easily replace it. And that's one thing I really like about this phone. With the battery, even if you have to replace the battery on your 11 Pro, it's going to cost you a lot of money. However, on this phone, you can easily get one on eBay, replace it yourself, and save a ton of money. So like I said, it's kind of like, you're getting an older phone and there's really not much going for for it, but there is that one cool little aspect of it that a lot of these newer phones don't necessarily have. So that's a really huge important thing that I wanted to hit on. Yeah, it's kind of a small thing, but I just figured out, it's really the main thing that has going for it. So I don't want to take away what the 5C brought, but I do think it was, an important phone at its time of its release. I don't really think it's that important now, but it is what it is. Everybody can make their own opinion about it. But is the iPhone 5C still worth it in 2020? I will say no, I don't think it is worth it. However, I think the lowest you should go on the iPhone totem pole is probably like an iPhone 6s or an iPhone SE. So those are the ones I would 100% recommend. I would not go for a 5C. I would go for an SE if you need that screen size. But if you want a little bit bigger, you can go for the 6s as well. So that pretty much covers it. If you guys have any other questions or anything, leave it down in the comment section below. Hit that like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit the subscribe button. Every single subscriber that we get really does count, so it means so much if you guys could hit that. Also check out the other links down in the description as well. My Twitter, my Instagram, my second channel, all those links are linked down below. I'd really appreciate it if you guys could check it out. But more importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out.